Hi, I'm Paul Guppy with the Washington Policy Center, and here's an update on what we're doing in the legislature this week. We're in week 2 of the legislative session for 2022. It's supposed to be a short session of 60 days. It started on January 10th, and usually what the legislature does is make adjustments to the current 2-year budget. But this year, they have a huge surplus, more than $8 billion surplus over the next 2 budget cycles. And we're expecting that the legislature is going to try to spend most of that. So we are tracking it. But here's a rundown on the issues that we're working on right now. So speaking of the budget, one thing that is encouraging and possibly unprecedented in our experience is that a senior Democratic member has introduced a very positive tax relief bill. So this is SB 5932, introduced by Representative Mona Das, and she is the vice chair of the Democratic caucus, so a leader on the Democratic side. And this is a straight up tax cut bill. So when you're doing an analysis, one thing that shows that a piece of legislation is clean and effective is how long it is. This bill is less than 2 pages long, and it simply changes one number in the state tax code. It would reduce 6.5% state tax to 5.5% state tax, and it's just that simple. There are not complicated mechanisms, there aren't conditions. It's not Christmas treed, as lawmakers say, with a lot of other provisions and special projects for members. It is a simple, direct policy change that would reduce the state sales tax by a full percentage point. The sales tax has not been reduced since 1982. As our research points out, the first sales tax from the 1930s was 2%, and this would ease it off a bit, and especially with inflation and economic problems coming, would provide about $2 billion in tax relief for the people of our state. The other thing our analysis shows regarding the sales tax reduction is that it benefits everybody in the state. It makes everything more affordable in our economy, even things that are not directly taxed. And the best part is that it reduces a flat tax, a regressive kind of tax. So the vast majority of the benefit goes to working families and lower income people. So we think this is a great bill, and we are going to be doing an analysis on it and to promote it, and we think that's very positive. Regarding whether other members of the Democratic caucus will join on, we're not sure about that yet, and so we'll continue to track that. We do think that most Republicans will support it, so we'll see what happens from there. The next bill we're looking at is SB 5909, again introduced by the Democratic leadership, and this is an emergency powers reform bill. It is much more complicated and elaborate than the other bill I described, and there's a hearing on this bill on January 28th. Our budget and government reform expert, Jason Mercier, will testify at this hearing. And one of the first things Jason is going to point out is that this bill, as written, doesn't actually change much about the governor's emergency powers. We are going on about 690 days of governance in our state where normal democracy has been suspended and Governor Inslee is basically governing on his own. He, as we've all experienced over the last 2 years, he often does this without consultation with the legislature. He develops policies on his own and then simply announces them to the state. So we're trying to get back to normal democracy, normal legislative oversight. At the hearing, Jason will point out that the bill as introduced has a very broad title. And what that means is that within the legislature, it's eligible for amendments. There are a couple of good bills, particularly SB 5039, which would, again, a much cleaner, straightforward bill. Like other states, that bill would impose a 30-day limit on emergencies, and then the governor has to check in with the legislature, and the legislature can extend the emergency for another 30 days. Virtually every other state has a rule like this. So although the better bill is not the main one that's being considered, we're hopeful that it will be introduced as an amendment later on, and the Senate and the House can vote on that proposal as well. The next bill is HB 1732, and again, this is a positive move from our point of view. It responds to some of the analysis that we've done over the last year about the defects and the problems of the long-term care payroll tax. That tax was supposed to kick in on January 1st. It was so unpopular that hundreds of thousands of people opted out of the program before the deadline hit, while they still could. And the Democrats seem to have seen that problem. they got that signal from the public, and so they have delayed implementation of that program. And the governor sent a little bit of a confusing signal about whether employees are supposed to collect the tax, employers are supposed to collect the tax or not. But what's encouraging is this bill has been introduced, which would delay the long-term care tax for 18 months. That's great, a year and a half to think about this program. But after 18 months, it's still going to be as flawed and as unpopular as it is today. So we don't really see that as a solution. Elizabeth on our staff is the top independent expert on this issue. She comments on it in the media all the time. She talks to lawmakers, and she will be testifying on this bill. The number one message she's going to convey regarding our recommendation is that this long-term care program has clearly failed even before it started. People don't want it. No other state has a program like this, and this experiment has failed clearly, and that lawmakers should just repeal it and go back to the drawing board. Actually, what they should do is focus on making private care more affordable by reducing taxes and regulations on private insurance. That's fairly obvious, and we'll continue to promote that. Next is a much more controversial bill, SB 5735, introduced by Senator Dinga of Kirkland, and this would cut class time for students in public schools by 20%. So it would essentially close the public schools on Fridays, and students would learn at home. And they call this asynchronous learning. Leave it to the education bureaucracy to come up with a complicated term for what is essentially homework. So the schools would want to count the time that students work at home as being quote unquote classroom time. Lee Finna on our staff has already testified on this bill. It is turning out to be unpopular, as you would expect, as the state learns, people across the state learn about it. And Leave has reported the latest test scores from the OSPI, Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, and the State Board of Education. And of course, it shows that state test scores for students are down across the board: English, math, all other subjects. Dropout rates are very high. The achievement gap between white and Black and other students is as wide as ever. We were always told that more funding would solve these problems. The McCleary decision was supposed to solve these problems, and it just hasn't happened. And now there's a bill to cut classroom instruction by 20%. So it was heard in committee. Leave reports that the bill was listed to be passed by the committee on that day, and they delayed it. So in the legislature, delay often means it's dead, but nothing is dead until we get to the end of the session. So this is a bad idea, and we're hoping that the reaction of the public has killed this bill, but we'll see what happens after that. Next is a bill that's kind of obscure but important for all of us, and that is HB 1727, and this would ban votes on citizen initiatives in odd-numbered years. So essentially, it would cut the number of opportunities to vote on a popular ballot initiative in half. These initiatives would only be allowed on even-numbered years. We're not quite sure what the reasoning is behind this bill. It was introduced by a Democratic member. We've tried to find out what the thinking is, whether it's to make the ballots, cleaner and shorter, whether it's to simplify the process, or whether it's just simply to reduce the opportunity to pass citizen initiatives. We do know that lawmakers are often frustrated because they will enact something, and then there will be a citizen initiative to repeal it, a referendum, and they don't like that. They also don't like ideas to be promoted the way the Washington State Civil Rights Act was passed years ago, done entirely by popular initiative without the involvement of the legislature. So this appears to be an effort to cut back on our democracy, and that concerns us because we're already being governed under the emergency powers that appear to be extended indefinitely. And this would simply reduce the engagement of voters to be able to vote on popular initiatives. And so we see that as the cut to our democracy. And here we're hearing nationally that there are threats to our democracy, to our elections. There's more controversy about that than ever. And we don't understand why this bill was introduced. It seems like we should go in the other direction and increase people's confidence in the democratic process and have more opportunities to vote on ideas rather than banning votes in odd numbered years. So we'll see how that progresses. Our staff has already been invited here. We're in the second week of the legislative session, and our staff has been invited to speak to hearings and committee hearings 8 times so far on various bills. And we will continue to be engaged, and we see a number of important bills still coming up, and we'll track this right through the end of the session. And as always, our work is made possible by our supporters, and we certainly thank you for your support, and we're looking forward to a productive year. Thank you very much.